So, LGB Alliance, the UK's only charity for same-sex attracted people, has won quite an important court victory today. It's kind of breaking news as we're recording this. Mermaids, the trans rights or the trans activist youth organisation, I don't know what you want to call it.
You can't describe it accurately because you get sued.
Yeah, the urge to libel them is very strong. Essentially, they tried to strip the LGB Alliance of its charitable status in a pretty blatant attempt to silence their campaigning, because the LGB Alliance talks a lot about trans issues, gender ideology, how this impacts on gay and lesbian people. But they failed. LGB Alliance is going to keep its charity status. So, Tom, this is good news.
Oh, it's really good news. I think it's good news not just for the LGB Alliance, but for freedom of speech, but for genuine tolerance and for gay rights itself. I mean, what Mermaids were trying to do here, I mean, their technical reason was that the LGB Alliance was not purely devoted to its charitable endeavours. It was, if anything, was trying to undermine charities such as itself, which is hilarious given the fact that it's been now launched a years-long legal campaign to take out the LGB Alliance. But it was obviously clear what this was. It was an attempt to assert that there is only one legitimate perspective when it comes to LGBT anti +++++ issues, and that therefore it is almost illegitimate to be a charity which is solely devoted to same-sex attracted people, which is what the LGB Alliance is. As you say, it is the only charity in the UK which is solely devoted to those issues. And that fact, combined with the attempt to shut it down, which has happened ever since they were founded back in 2019, proves their point perfectly, which is to say that the rise of gender ideology has not only just taken some of the focus away from questions of gay rights, it's actually undermined gay rights. Insofar as if you don't believe biological sex is a thing, then in what sense can you have same-sex attraction? They've been very important, I think, in highlighting the phenomenon of, for instance, lesbians feeling coerced or forced to have sex or to have relationships with quote-unquote lesbians who are still in possession of a penis and all this sort of thing. Again, which the various ways in which a kind of really ugly homophobic climate is being brought back via gender ideology. You know, you just haven't had a good shag, essentially. You know, you'll like it if you try it, sort of stuff. It's really horrible. But also in talking about the fact, the questions around children, which is obviously pertinent to Mermaids, which is to say that, again, if we're dealing with gender ideology, if we're dealing in these incredibly regressive stereotypes around, I mean, Mermaids would literally have a wall chart that would have G.I. Joe on one hand and like Barbie on the other and say, that's male, that's female.
Yeah.
What do you identify with? That if you recycle these kinds of stereotypes, then what you're going to end up with is a lot of gay boys, lesbian girls starting to think, oh, I'm attracted to the same sex, therefore I'm defective. I should be male or I should be female. I need to correct myself by some sort of procedure. And that's horrifying. And yet, again, through raising these very important points, there was just this desperate attempt to crush them. Good thing about this, not only just that it's burnished free speech, as we're talking about, their right to campaign on these particular issues, but it's also that I think they've run a bit of a moral victory as well, as far as a lot of the points that they were set out to make were also been vindicated throughout this whole painful and very expensive process that that's been put through.
There were some quite interesting moments at the tribunal. One of the chairs of trustees said she didn't know whether babies have a sex when they're born. For instance, of the trustees of Mermaids, I should say. I mean, has this kind of just exposed gender ideology as the sham that it is? I mean, these people have no idea what they're talking about.
They keep telling on themselves every time. I mean, every single time there is this story in the media, every time this discussion is revived, they cannot help but say completely inane and mental stuff. So, if anything, they put the ammunition on the platter for the rest of us to take it down. Yet still, they enjoy such ginormous institutional, governmental, legal support and everything they have, even though it's tacitly insane in many cases, which is extremely troubling. And I think you guys will probably brand this victory in a different way to me, but I think like the resistance to gender identity or gender ideology stuff in Britain is like the only conservative social victory of the last few decades, and it's been achieved by like a lethal cocktail of gay men and left-wing women, and like it's
fuck with them,
yeah, exactly, yeah, but no, because you know, impotent Tories versus these people who are seeing their rights being trampled on and the movement defiled by a bunch of people who don't believe in objective reality. It's heartening to see. And I think it's the kind of, as I mentioned before, the idea that culture is downstream of politics. I think, you know, the gender critical team recognize this very seriously, and that if they're going to make any difference in terms of shifting people's minds, they've got to strip back the institutional legitimacy given to so many of these people, which they wear with pride. I mean, quite literally, they will turn up saying, these people sponsor me, these banks give me cash, this minister thinks I'm the best thing since sliced bread, but it's all a pile of bullshit.
And I think just to tack onto that as well, one of the reasons that I think this is so important as well is that it highlights again how genuinely reactionary this politics is, and why it's so natural that a lot of left-wing feminists and veterans of the gay liberation campaign, which is people who've set up LGB Alliance, are very much of that particular ilk, would have so much problem with them. And you've effectively had a situation in which you had supposed sections of the left cheering on the attempt to crush a gay rights organisation, one of the very few gay rights organisations that still actually exist, one which were campaigning against restrictive stereotypes which were being actually used to effectively potentially frog march young children into going through painful and potentially life-altering surgeries. I think there's this kind of tendency to see all this stuff as progressive, even amongst its critics, to see it as a sort of form of progressivism gone mad. But there's nothing progressive about thinking the sky isn't blue, about thinking that the terrible treatment of confused children, basically sacrificing at the altar of ideology, is great because it's different and it changes things. A lot of what's fascinating, whether we're talking about the race issue, whether we're talking about the gender issue, all kinds of different things, is that it has unleashed, reified, refashioned some very age-old, ugly prejudices, but repackaged them as progressive. So it doesn't surprise me at all that, particularly where the gender issue is concerned, but not exclusively, some of the people who've been most effective at pushing back at that haven't been conservatives necessarily. It has been people who recognise this for what it is from the off, I suppose.
There is also a kind of populist element to this, I think. It's taking on the experts who are talking complete bullshit about using these bizarre sort of language games to justify absolute nonsense. And people like the LGB Alliance, people like, I don't know, Standing for Women or Kelly J. Keenan saying, no, actually, a man cannot have a vagina, a woman cannot have a penis, men cannot be mothers. There's something quite powerful in that kind of truth-telling, and that simplistic truth-telling.
It's slicing up all manners of sacred cows. Sacred cows are only starting to exist of a few years, perhaps. They're recent arrivals, but with the enormous amount of support, celebrity support, and governmental support they get, they become deified immediately. It's a real lesson in the power of truthfulness over social harmony. And some of the responses you get when you push forward an objective basis for biological sex, an objective basis for not blocking the natural development of a child, that you will hear things like, "Oh, are you a biologist?" or "Can you define what a cat is?" Kind of really ludicrously juvenile and low IQ arguments that a child could bat them away. And it's depressing to see them get so much traction elsewhere.
And Tom, I mean, one of the funny things about this is that Mermaids, the trans youth charity, has really been hoisted by its own petard here.
Well, yes, because in the course of it trying to prosecute this legal challenge, it's brought a hell of a lot of scrutiny on its own operations. All kinds of allegations about sending breast binders to young girls behind parents' backs and so on. But it also has led to its own formal investigation. So back in November, there was an initial investigation by the Charity Commission that was opened up into its practices. It's now subject to a full kind of statutory grilling as a consequence of exposing itself. But I think one thing that we can take from this whole process is that once you get gender ideology, as we've just been saying, in a kind of environment in which it really has to stand up for itself, it wilts very quickly, it exposes itself very quickly. The problem that has been from the off is that it's just been protected from that kind of challenge. But when you're in a tribunal, when you're in a courtroom, when you're in a proper debate, they fall away quite quickly. And that's one of the upsides to this, definitely.